Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. From a small, muddy village on the banks of the Tiber to a colossal empire that defined the known world, its name still echoes with power, ambition, and legacy. Rome. For 1,000 years, its legions carved out an empire, stretching from the cold mists of Britain to the scorching sands of Syria. Its engineers built aqueducts and roads that still stand today, and its laws formed the bedrock of Western justice. But how did a republic of farmers conquer the world? And how did this seemingly invincible superpower crumble into dust? Join us as we journey through centuries of glory, betrayal, and collapse to tell the epic story of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. The story of Rome does not begin with marble columns or conquering legions, but in the realm of myth, with a tale of divine blood, betrayal, and a she-wolf's compassion. It starts in the ancient city of Alba Longa, ruled by the wise King Numitor. His reign, however, was violently usurped by his younger, ambitious brother, Amulius. To secure his illegitimate throne and eliminate any potential claimants, Amulius forced Numitor's only daughter, Rhea Silvia, to become a Vestal Virgin, a priestess sworn to a vow of chastity for 30 years. But destiny, or perhaps the gods themselves, had other plans. Rhea. Silvia claimed she was visited by Mars, the formidable god of war, and from this divine union, she conceived and gave birth to twin sons of extraordinary vigor and beauty, Romulus and Remus. Enraged and fearful of the prophecy that Rhea Silvia's offspring would overthrow him, King Amulius ordered the infants to be drowned in the Tiber River. The servant tasked with this grim duty, however, took pity on the boys. He placed them in a basket and set them adrift on the river's currents, which were swollen from a recent storm. Instead of being swept away to their deaths, the basket gently drifted ashore at the foot of the Palatine Hill. Here, the most iconic part of the legend unfolds. The crying infants were discovered by a she-wolf, Lupa, who, instead of harming them, was moved by a maternal instinct. She carried them to her lair and suckled them, saving them from starvation. Soon after, a royal shepherd named Faustulus stumbled upon this miraculous scene. He took the boys home to his wife, Acca Larentia, and they raised the twins as their own sons, unaware of their noble and divine lineage. As Romulus and Remus grew into strong and charismatic young men, their natural leadership qualities became apparent. They led bands of shepherds, defending their flocks and fighting against robbers. It was during one of these skirmishes that Remus was captured and brought before King Amulius. The twins' true identity was eventually revealed, and upon learning of their heritage and the injustices suffered by their family, they rallied supporters, stormed the palace of Alba Longa, killed the usurper Amulius, and restored their grandfather Numitor to his rightful throne. Their destiny, however, was not to rule in Alba Longa. The brothers were destined to build a city of their own, on the very hills where they had been saved by the she-wolf, setting the stage for an epic foundation and a tragic, fratricidal conflict. With their grandfather restored to the throne of Alba Longa, Romulus and Remus set out to found their own city. Yet, the partnership that had conquered a king was shattered by a dispute over who should rule their new settlement. An omen from the gods, a flight of vultures, was interpreted differently by each brother, leading to a fatal quarrel. Romulus, claiming divine favor, began to build a wall around his chosen spot on the Palatine Hill. In a moment of mockery, Remus leaped over the half-built wall, an act for which Romulus struck him down, declaring, "So shall it be for all who dare to cross my walls." With his brother's blood consecrating the foundation, the city of Rome was born in 753 BC, and Romulus became its first king. His initial challenge was to populate his new city. Rome became a sanctuary for fugitives, exiles, and runaway slaves. But it was a city of men. To secure its future, Romulus orchestrated the legendary rape of the Sabine women, abducting the daughters of the neighboring Sabine tribe during a festival. This act sparked a war, which famously ended when the Sabine women themselves, now wives and mothers, ran between the battle lines, pleading with their fathers and husbands to stop the bloodshed. The conflict ended in peace, and the Sabines merged with the Romans, doubling the city's strength. After a long and foundational reign, Romulus mysteriously vanished in a storm, believed to have been taken up to the heavens to become the god Quirinus. He was succeeded by a series of 6 other kings, whose reigns shaped the nascent city-state. Numa Pompilius, a Sabine, brought peace and religious law, establishing the Roman calendar and the priesthoods. The warlike Tullus Hostilius followed, expanding Rome's territory through conquest. Ancus Marcius, Numa's grandson, focused on public works, building the first bridge across the Tiber, and founding the port of Ostia. The final 3 kings were of Etruscan descent, reflecting the growing influence of the powerful civilization to the north. Tarquinius Priscus drained the marshy lowlands to build the Roman Forum and began the Circus Maximus. Servius Tullius conducted the first census, organizing citizens into classes based on wealth for military and tax purposes. The final king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, would rule not as a benevolent monarch, but as a tyrant, whose arrogance and cruelty would bring an end to the age of kings and usher in a new era for Rome. The reign of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, the 7th and final king of Rome, was a dark chapter defined by despotism and fear. He seized the throne through assassination, murdering his predecessor and father-in-law, Servius Tullius, and ruled with an iron fist. Tarquin the Proud ignored the Senate, executed his opponents without trial, and burdened the populace with lavish construction projects, treating the citizens of Rome as his personal subjects rather than a people to be governed. His tyranny extended through his family, particularly his arrogant son, Sextus Tarquinius. The catalyst for revolution came not from a political conspiracy, but from a deeply personal and tragic violation. While the Roman army was away besieging the city of Ardea, Sextus Tarquinius became obsessed with Lucretia, the famously virtuous wife of the nobleman Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus. Under the guise of hospitality, Sextus visited Lucretia's home, where he threatened and ultimately raped her. The next day, a devastated Lucretia summoned her father, Spurius Lucretius, her husband Collatinus, and their influential friend, Lucius Junius Brutus. Before these men, she recounted the horrific assault, and declaring that no unchaste woman should live by her example, plunged a dagger into her own heart. The sight of the dying Lucretia and the profound injustice of her fate ignited a firestorm of outrage. Lucius Junius Brutus, who had for years feigned foolishness to survive under Tarquin's paranoid rule, revealed his true, resolute character. He drew the bloody dagger from Lucretia's chest and swore a sacred oath to avenge her death and expel the Tarquins from Rome forever. he rallied the grief-stricken men and carried Lucretia's body to the Roman Forum. There he delivered a fiery speech, recounting not only the crime against Lucretia, but all the abuses of Tarquin's reign. The Roman people, already seething with resentment, were moved to open rebellion. The gates of the city were closed, the Senate was convened, and a decree was passed deposing and banishing the king and his entire family. When Tarquin the Proud rushed back from the military camp to quell the uprising, he found the city barred against him. The monarchy, which had ruled Rome for 244 years, was abolished. In its place, in 509 BC, a new form of government was established. The res publica, the public thing. Power would no longer rest in the hands of a single lifelong king, but with two annually elected consuls, ensuring that no one man could ever again hold absolute authority over Rome. The overthrow of the monarchy was a victory for liberty, but this newfound freedom was not shared equally. The infant Roman Republic was immediately defined by a stark and contentious social divide between two distinct classes or orders, the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were the aristocracy, a small group of wealthy land-owning families who traced their lineage back to the original senators appointed by Romulus. They held a complete monopoly on power. They controlled the Senate, held all political offices, interpreted the laws, and served as the high priests of the state religion. On the other side were the plebeians, who constituted the vast majority of the Roman citizenry. This diverse group included everyone from small farmers and artisans to merchants and laborers. Despite being the backbone of the Roman army and economy, they were effectively second-class citizens. They could not hold public office, could not marry into patrician families, and had little to no say in the government they were expected to serve and defend. The most pressing grievance for the plebeians was the issue of debt. In an agrarian society, a bad harvest could force a small farmer into crippling debt to a wealthy patrician landowner. The laws, written and enforced by patricians, were merciless. A debtor who could not pay could be forced into bondage, effectively becoming a slave to his creditor. This systemic injustice, combined with a lack of political representation and the arbitrary nature of patrician rule, created a powder keg of social tension. The breaking point came in 494 BC. Fed up with their perpetual disenfranchisement and the crushing burden of debt, the plebeian soldiers, upon returning from a military campaign, refused to re-enter the city. In a revolutionary act of collective civil disobedience, they seceded from Rome, retreating en masse to the nearby Mons Sacer, the Sacred Mount. This was the first secessio plebis, or secession of the plebs. Their withdrawal brought Rome to a standstill. The fields were untended, workshops fell silent, and more importantly, the city was left defenseless. The patricians, realizing they could not rule or defend a city without its people, were forced to the negotiating table. The result of this first struggle was a monumental victory for the plebeians. The patricians agreed to cancel debts and release those in bondage. More significantly, they consented to the creation of a new political office exclusively for the plebeians, the tribune of the plebs. These tribunes were granted the power of veto, the ability to block any action by a patrician magistrate that they deemed harmful to the common people. This was the first crack in the patrician monopoly on power, marking the beginning of a centuries-long struggle for equality that would ultimately define the character and the laws of the Roman Republic. The great conflicts of history are not always fought with swords and shields. Sometimes they are waged within the gilded corridors of power, within a single human heart. For Princess Margaret, her Punic War was a protracted, soul-wrenching struggle against an empire of tradition. Her Carthage, the rival power she sought to embrace, was not a city across the sea, but a simple, profound love for a divorced man, Group Captain Peter Townsend. The Roman Republic, in this telling, was the unyielding institution of the British monarchy, an establishment fortified by the Church of England and the British government. The battle lines were drawn not in the sand, but in the very fabric of the Constitution. This was not a swift campaign, but a grueling war of attrition. For years, the matter was debated, postponed, and dissected. The public, initially sympathetic to the young, glamorous princess, became a volatile force, their opinions swayed by newspaper headlines that acted as battlefield dispatches. Within the palace walls, strategies were formed. Courtiers, like Roman senators, debated the potential fallout. Could the monarchy withstand such a direct challenge to its foundational doctrines, particularly the sanctity of marriage, a doctrine so fiercely defended during her own uncle's abdication? Margaret's desire was seen as a mortal threat, an enemy force that, if allowed to triumph, could weaken the crown's authority. She fought with the only weapons she had: her will, her public charm, and the hope that time and love could conquer all. But the Roman state was ancient, patient, and powerful. It demanded unconditional surrender. Every smile in public was a carefully managed sortie, every private moment of anguish a silent retreat. This was a war for her own sovereignty, a clash between the woman she was and the princess she was born to be. And the enemy was the very world that had created her. With the war against her Carthage lost and the siege lifted, the establishment had reasserted its dominance. Rome was once again the undisputed master. For Margaret, the path forward required a different kind of conquest. If she could not conquer the old world of tradition with her love for Townsend, she would conquer a new world on her own terms. This new territory was the burgeoning Bohemian arts scene of London, a world as sophisticated, complex, and alluring as ancient Greece was to Rome. Her conquest was embodied in the figure of Anthony Armstrong Jones, a society photographer with charm, talent, and a background far removed from the landed aristocracy. He was not a prince or a duke. He was an artist, a commoner, who represented a thrilling modern world. Their marriage in 1960 was a masterstroke of public relations for the monarchy. It was seen as a great victory, a sign that the institution could adapt and embrace the new. The Crown, by sanctioning this union, effectively annexed the vibrant cultural territory of the swinging 60s, appearing progressive and in touch. For Margaret, this was a different kind of power. She became a patron of the arts, a leader of the fashionable set, and half of London's most glamorous couple. She and Tony, who became the Earl of Snowdon, held court not in stuffy palaces, but in their Kensington Palace apartment, a hub for actors, writers, and musicians. She had become a master of this new Mediterranean, a dazzling social sea. But like Rome's conquest of Greece, this victory was complex. While Rome absorbed Greek culture, it also subjugated it. Margaret had found a new realm, but it was one still tethered to the crown. She was celebrated for her modernity, yet she remained a princess. Her rebellion now channeled into a more palatable, stylish, but ultimately controlled form The Gracchi brothers were Roman aristocrats who challenged the Senate, advocating for reforms that shook the foundations of the Republic. In the 1960s and 70s, Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon became the monarchy's own Gracchi, a dual force of aristocratic insiders who, through their very lifestyle, planted seeds of revolution. They did not seek to overthrow the crown, but their actions fundamentally challenged its age-old conventions and mystique. Together, they operated as a unit of glamorous disruption. Their parties were legendary, mixing blue bloods with the new meritocracy of actors, pop stars, and designers, breaking down the rigid class barriers the monarchy was built upon. Their public arguments and passionate reconciliations, captured by an ever-present press, stripped away the veneer of royal perfection. They presented a picture of a modern, volatile, and intensely human marriage, something the public had never witnessed from a senior royal. This was a quiet, cultural revolution. Where the monarchy had always projected an image of staid duty and emotional restraint, the Snowdons projected passion, creativity, and chaos. Tony, with his camera, and Margaret, with her wit and royal status, exposed the institution to a modern sensibility it was not prepared for. They were insiders who refused to play by the old rules. Their long, drawn-out separation and eventual divorce in 1978 was a landmark event. It was the first divorce of a senior royal since Henry VIII, shattering a precedent that had cost Margaret her first love. The seeds they had sown had finally sprouted. By living their lives so publicly, they demystified the monarchy, paving the way for future generations of royals to be seen not as divine figures, but as celebrities, flawed, relatable, and subject to the same human frailties as anyone else. Their rebellion was not a failure. It was a slow-burning fuse that changed the palace forever. In the annals of history, great change is often precipitated not by a single cataclysmic event, but by a fundamental shift in the tools of power. For the Roman Republic, that shift came with Gaius Marius. Before him, the army was a citizen's duty, a temporary service to the state. But Marius, facing manpower shortages, opened recruitment to the landless poor, the capite censi. He promised them land, spoils, and a future. In doing so, he professionalized the legions. But he also severed their primary loyalty to the Senate and tethered it directly to the general who paid and led them. They became known as Marius mules, carrying their own gear, fiercely devoted to their commander. The army was no longer an instrument of the state. It was the political tool of an individual. Within the palace walls, a similar transformation was taking place, not with swords and standards, but with cameras and headlines. Princess Margaret, in her own way, was forging a new kind of army. The traditional power of the monarchy rested on institutional deference and mystique. But Margaret, perhaps intuitively, understood the burgeoning power of modern celebrity. She began to cultivate a following loyal not just to the crown, but to her specifically. Her charisma, her fashion, her highly publicized social life, these were her recruitment tools. The press and the public became her legions, a force that could be mobilized to grant her an influence independent of the rigid palace hierarchy. Like Marius's soldiers, this new army was not motivated by abstract duty to the state, but by a more personal, emotional connection to their general. They were fascinated by her. They defended her, and they granted her a form of power her staid predecessors could never have imagined. This was a dangerous innovation, Just as a general with a loyal army could threaten the political order, a royal with a devoted public following could challenge the monolithic authority of the institution. Margaret was learning to wield this new weapon, turning public opinion into her personal political capital. And in doing so, she was fundamentally altering the balance of power inside the palace forever. The precedent set by Marius found its terrifying conclusion in his rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. When his political enemies sought to strip him of a prestigious command, Sulla did the unthinkable. He turned his army, an army of Roman citizens, against Rome itself. To march a legion across the Pomerium, the city's sacred boundary, was a sacrilege of the highest order, a violation of religious law and centuries of tradition. It was an act from which the Republic would never truly recover. The Rubicon would be crossed later. But it was Sulla who first demonstrated that the state's own weapons could be used to conquer it from within. For Princess Margaret, her own Pomerium was the invisible but ironclad line of royal protocol, public decorum, and marital fidelity. The monarchy's survival depended on its members upholding these sacred boundaries. Margaret, feeling stripped of her own command, her personal happiness, her choice in marriage, would eventually commit her own form of sacrilege. Her increasingly public indiscretions, culminating in the explosive affair with Roddy Llewellyn, were her march on Rome. It was a deliberate turning of her royal status, her public platform, against the very institution that granted it to her. Every photograph from Moustique, every whispered rumor that became a headline, was another legion crossing that sacred line. The public, her army, was both enthralled and scandalized. She was using the fame and privilege endowed by the crown to openly defy its most fundamental expectations. This wasn't merely a personal failing, it was a constitutional crisis played out in the tabloids. Like Sulla, she demonstrated that the traditions meant to contain her were ultimately just lines on a map, and that a sufficiently determined individual, armed with immense public fascination, could simply march right over them. The act shattered the illusion of a unified, unimpeachable royal family. It was a direct assault on the mystique of the monarchy, proving that its own members could become its most dangerous internal threat. While generals and politicians battled for control of the Republic, its greatest existential threat came from the very bottom of society. Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator, was not a Roman. He was a slave, a piece of property, trained to fight and die for the entertainment of his masters. Yet, when he and his fellow gladiators broke free, they ignited a fire that nearly consumed Italy. The Servile War was more than a rebellion. It was a terrifying repudiation of the entire Roman social order. For 2 years, a man with nothing, a slave, held the mighty legions at bay and made the most powerful state in the world tremble. Princess Margaret was born at the absolute apex of the social order, the antithesis of a slave. And yet, in the gilded cage of royalty, she experienced her own form of bondage. She was bound by duty, by protocol, by the expectations of a nation and an ancient institution. Her life was not her own. It was a performance for the benefit of the crown. In this context, her rebellion can be seen not as a grab for power, but as a desperate fight for freedom, a spiritual slave revolt. She was the gladiator in the arena of public life, forced to perform her royal duties under the ceaseless gaze of the world. Her defiance, her insistence on choosing her own friends, her own lifestyle, her own path to happiness, was her breaking of chains. To the establishment, Her actions were as shocking as Spartacus's uprising. They represented a rejection of the natural order of things. A princess was supposed to be dutiful, not defiant, an asset, not a problem. By refusing to play her assigned role, Margaret revealed the deep unhappiness that could fester beneath the surface of unimaginable privilege. She gave voice to the idea that one could be imprisoned by a crown just as surely as by chains. Her struggle made the monarchy tremble, not because she threatened to overthrow it, but because she exposed its human cost and questioned the very nature of the sacrifice it demanded of its own. The slow death of the Roman Republic was accelerated by an unprecedented political arrangement. The first triumvirate was not a formal office, but a private pact between the three most powerful men in Rome: Pompey the Great, the celebrated general; Marcus Crassus, the wealthiest man in the city; and the ambitious Julius Caesar. Together, they bypassed the Senate and carved up the state to serve their own interests, their combined influence making them more powerful than the Republic itself. It was an uneasy alliance, driven by mutual need and personal ambition, and it signaled the end of collective rule. Within the House of Windsor, a new, informal triumvirate of personality was also coming to define the monarchy's direction. This was the dynamic between Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, and Princess Margaret. Each represented a vital and often conflicting pole of power. The Queen, like Pompey, was the embodiment of tradition and the state, the source of legitimate authority, beloved and respected. Prince Philip, with his drive for modernization and his independent sphere of influence, was the Crassus of the trio, a powerful consort with his own agenda and resources. And then there was Margaret, the charismatic and popular Caesar, building her own power base among the public and the fashionable elite, often operating outside the established channels of the court. Their relationship was a complex interplay of duty, affection, and intense rivalry. The Queen set the standard, Philip pushed the boundaries of the consort's role, and Margaret tested the very limits of what it meant to be royal. The great decisions and crises of the mid-century monarchy were shaped not just by the institution, but by the gravitational pull of these three personalities. This informal triumvirate, this family pact, effectively superseded the old, monolithic structure. Power was no longer solely vested in the sovereign. It was a negotiated reality between the dutiful monarch, the progressive consort, and the rebellious princess. Their alliance, like the Roman one, was a sign that the old order was gone, replaced by a more volatile and personality-driven age. Following the public renunciation of Peter Townsend, Princess Margaret was adrift in a sea of expectation and heartbreak. The establishment had won, and her duty had been performed, but the cost was a profound, personal emptiness. The years that followed were a blur of social engagements, a performance of the cheerful, glamorous princess the public adored. But behind the dazzling smile was a woman searching for an anchor. The courtiers and aristocrats presented suitable, titled men, each one a safe, predictable choice that would have pleased the palace. But for Margaret, safety had become synonymous with suffocation. She craved not a title, but a spark, not a pedigree, but a personality. She found it in a most unexpected place, a small dinner party in 1958. There, she was introduced to Anthony Armstrong Jones, a society photographer with a sharp wit and a bohemian spirit that was the antithesis of palace life. He wasn't royalty, He wasn't even nobility. He was a commoner who worked for a living, inhabiting a world of artists, actors, and intellectuals. For Margaret, he was a breath of fresh, intoxicating air. Their courtship was a closely guarded secret, a whirlwind romance conducted away from the glare of the press in the studios and modest flats of Tony's London. He treated her not as a princess, but as a woman, an equal. This was the validation she had yearned for. When he proposed, it was Margaret's moment of decision, her personal Rubicon. To accept was to turn her back on the world of acceptable suitors and to formally close the chapter on Townsend forever. It was a defiant choice, a declaration that she would forge her own path to happiness. In February 1960, the engagement was announced, stunning the nation and the world. The die was cast. Princess Margaret had crossed her river, and there was no turning back. She was gambling her future on a new kind of royal marriage, one that promised passion and modernity, but would inevitably set her on a collision course with the very institution she represented. The wedding was a fairy tale, the first royal wedding to be broadcast on television, watched by millions. Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon, as Tony was now known, were the epitome of 60s glamour and modernity. They were the couple who would supposedly drag the monarchy into the 20th century. But the bright promise of their union, their dictatorship of cool, began to corrode almost immediately. The very qualities that had drawn them together, their fierce independence, artistic temperaments, and craving for the spotlight, soon became the instruments of their undoing. Their home in Kensington Palace became a battlefield for two competing egos. Arguments, once private, grew louder and more vicious. Lord Snowdon, resentful of his secondary role in the royal hierarchy, channeled his frustrations into his work and, allegedly, into the arms of other women. He was known to leave cruel, cutting notes for his wife, one reportedly listing, "Things I hate about you." This was not a disagreement. It was psychological warfare. Margaret, in turn, refused to be a victim. She retaliated with her own sharp tongue and, as the marriage crumbled, her own infidelities. The assassination was not a single event, but a slow, painful process of 1,000 cuts. The dictator being slain was the public image of their perfect marriage, an illusion they both struggled to maintain. The Ides of March for their relationship was a creeping realization that the love and passion that had once defined them had been replaced by a toxic cocktail of resentment, jealousy, and mutual contempt. They were trapped together by duty, by their children, and by the scandal a divorce would cause. The public saw the glamorous parties and the stylish photographs, but behind closed doors, the dream was dying, betrayed by the very people who had created it. The fairy tale had become a tragedy, and the rebel princess found herself in a prison of her own making. A marriage that was now a cold, undeclared war. From the smoking ruins of her marriage, a new chapter for Princess Margaret was about to begin. The chaos of her public separation from Lord Snowdon in 1976, which culminated in the first senior royal divorce since Henry VIII, was a scandal of epic proportions. She was vilified in the press, painted as a failed wife and a hedonistic royal. But in the midst of this public demolition, Margaret was quietly forging a new empire for herself, one built not on duty, but on personal liberation. The catalyst for this new reign was a young landscape gardener named Roddy Llewellyn, 17 years her junior. Their relationship, which began while she was still married, was exposed by tabloid photographs, throwing fuel on the fire of her marital breakdown. Yet, for Margaret, Roddy was not a scandal. He was a salvation. He offered her affection, fun, and a youthful energy that was a balm to her wounded spirit. The heart of this new empire was the Caribbean island of Mystique. On a 10-acre plot of land given to her as a wedding present, she had built a villa, Les Jolies Eaux, or the Beautiful Waters. This was her true kingdom, a sun-drenched sanctuary, far from the judgment of the British press and the stifling protocols of the palace. Here, with Roddy and a circle of trusted friends, she was not Her Royal Highness. She was simply Margaret. She swam, she sunbathed, she hosted legendary parties, and she lived with a freedom she had never known. This was the rise of a new Margaret, an Augustus emerging from the civil war of her divorce. She had taken the chaos, the public humiliation, and the personal heartbreak, and from it, she had constructed a new world on her own terms. It was a defiant act, a declaration that even in her 50s, the rebel inside the palace was not just surviving. She was building a new life from the ashes of the old. Every empire, no matter how vibrant, eventually finds its twilight. For Princess Margaret, her Pax Romana was not a period of grand prosperity or untroubled peace, but rather a long, bittersweet armistice with the world and with herself. The passionate 8-year relationship with Roddy Llewellyn eventually faded, and he went on to marry someone else, a blow that Margaret felt deeply but accepted with a weary grace. She never remarried, nor did she have another great public love affair. The fiery rebellions of her youth and middle age slowly gave way to a quieter, more solitary existence. This fragile peace was increasingly challenged by her declining health. A lifetime of smoking and drinking began to take its toll. A series of illnesses and accidents, culminating in several debilitating strokes, gradually stripped away her famous glamour and vitality. The vibrant princess, who had captivated the world, was now confined to a wheelchair, her famous violet blue eyes often clouded by pain and frustration. Yet, in this period of physical decline, one relationship remained a bedrock of stability: her bond with her sister, the Queen. Despite the scandals and the headaches Margaret had caused the monarchy over the decades, the sisters' deep, abiding affection never wavered. The Queen's weekly visits and phone calls were a constant, a private testament to a love that transcended titles and duty. This was Margaret's version of peace, an acceptance of her role, a reconciliation with the choices she had made, and the quiet comfort of her sister's unwavering loyalty. It was a truce, not a victory. Her life had not been one of calm prosperity, but a tumultuous reign of passion, rebellion, and consequence. The Pax Romana of her later years was a time for reflection on the rebel inside the palace, a complex woman who had lived a life of dazzling highs and devastating lows, forever caught between the crown and her own heart. The year 1976 was Princess Margaret's Rubicon. The carefully constructed facade of her marriage to Lord Snowdon had been crumbling for years, but this was the year the walls came down for all the world to see. The period became her own Year of the Four Emperors, a tumultuous and chaotic struggle for control played out on the front pages of the world's tabloids. The key players in this imperial drama were Margaret herself, the embattled empress, her husband, Anthony Armstrong-Jones, a rival power center with his own affairs and ambitions, her much younger lover, Roddy Llewellyn, the unexpected claimant to her affections, and the press, the Praetorian Guard that could make or break them all. The publication of photographs showing Margaret and Llewellyn together on the Caribbean island of Mustique was the spark that ignited the inferno. The images, intimate and carefree, depicted a princess finding solace far from the stultifying confines of the palace. To the public, however, it was a scandalous betrayal of her duties. The narrative was set. She was the decadent royal, abandoning her post for a dalliance with a landscape gardener, 17 years her junior. The political fallout was immediate. In Parliament, she was denounced as a royal parasite. The scandal provided a glimpse of the coming anarchy, a breakdown of the deferential order that had long protected the royal family. The separation from Lord Snowdon was announced shortly thereafter, a seismic event that confirmed the chaos. The battle lines were drawn not just between husband and wife, but between Margaret and the establishment she was born to serve. Her personal happiness was pitted against the crown's demand for propriety. In this chaotic year, Margaret fought for her own sovereignty, but the cost was immense. Her public image was irrevocably damaged, and the episode cemented her reputation as the ultimate royal rebel, a woman whose personal desires created a constitutional crisis in miniature. Following the public implosion of her marriage, Princess Margaret entered her own crisis of the 3rd century. The divorce, finalized in 1978, was a landmark of royal history, the first for a senior member of the family since Henry VIII. But for Margaret, it was the beginning of a long, slow siege upon her personal empire. Her world, once defined by glamour, access, and a certain revered status, was now on the brink. The 1980s were a period of profound dislocation for her. Stripped of the partnership that had, for all its toxicity, provided a framework for her life, she seemed adrift. The relationship with Roddy Llewellyn, the cause of so much turmoil, also eventually faded, leaving her increasingly isolated. While she continued her official duties, her heart was seldom in it. The fire of her youth had been banked, replaced by a creeping sense of disillusionment. This was a crisis of identity. Who was she, if not the glamorous princess or the controversial wife? The world was changing, and the deferential adoration she had once commanded was being replaced by scrutiny and, at times, ridicule. Her empire, her health, her spirit, her public standing was under constant attack, mostly from within. Her reliance on cigarettes and alcohol, longtime companions, deepened. These were the internal barbarians, slowly sacking the once impregnable fortress of her vitality. Friends noted a change. The sparkling wit could now turn acerbic and bitter. The laughter that once filled rooms was sometimes replaced by a melancholic silence. Health scares began to mount, small warnings of the larger battles to come. A brief hospitalization for a benign skin lesion, another for respiratory issues. Each incident was a tremor along the fault line of her well-being. Her personal domain was shrinking, her influence waning, and the rebel princess found herself fighting not against the palace, but against the relentless march of time and the consequences of a life lived unapologetically. As the turbulent 1980s gave way to the 1990s, Princess Margaret's life underwent a quiet but profound transformation, her own version of Constantine and the Cross. There was no sudden dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, but rather a gradual turning away from the battlefield of public opinion and high society. Her new faith was not religious in the traditional sense, but a recommitment to the core, unshakable pillars of her existence, her family and her duty, albeit on her own terms. The cross she chose to bear was one of quiet dignity and private resilience. She found a new purpose, a new capital for her life, far from the flashbulbs and gossip columns that had defined her middle years. This new center was found in her role as a grandmother and as a devoted aunt to a new generation of royals navigating their own public struggles. She offered counsel and a sympathetic ear, drawing from a deep well of personal experience with the pressures of the crown. Her focus shifted from the grand stage to the intimate sphere. While she still attended official functions, her energy was increasingly poured into her patronages, particularly those related to the arts and children's welfare, like the NSPCC and the Royal Ballet. Here she could operate with purpose and without the glare of scandal. Her home in Moustique, Les Jolies Hauts, once a symbol of bohemian escape and romantic intrigue, became more of a sanctuary, a place for peaceful retreat rather than hedonistic parties. This period was marked by a reconciliation of sorts, not with her ex-husband or the press, but with herself. She seemed to accept the parameters of her life, finding a measure of peace within the gilded cage. It was a strategic retreat, a consolidation of her power into a smaller, more manageable, and ultimately more meaningful domain. The rebel had not surrendered, but had chosen a different ground on which to make her stand. The quiet, unassailable territory of family and legacy. The final years of Princess Margaret's life were a tragic chronicle of the fall. Her personal Roman Empire, built on glamour, defiance, and a fiery spirit, finally succumbed to forces it could no longer repel. The corruption was not moral, but physical. The slow, inexorable decay of her health. A lifetime of heavy smoking and drinking had presented its bill, and it was devastatingly high. The barbarians at the gate were a series of debilitating illnesses that laid siege to her body. In 1998, she suffered a mild stroke while on holiday in Moustique. It was the first major breach of her defenses. A year later, a horrific accident in her bathroom saw her badly scald her feet, an injury that would confine her to a wheelchair for long periods and cause her constant pain, stripping away her mobility and independence. The public, who had once marveled at her beauty and style, now saw a frail, diminished figure. Further strokes followed, each one chipping away at her vision, her motor skills, and her formidable willpower. The vibrant princess who had captivated the world was fading, trapped within a failing body. This was the end of an era, not just for Margaret, but for the monarchy she represented. She was the last of a certain kind of royal, one who remembered the Blitz, danced with film stars, and embodied the tensions between ancient tradition and the modern world. Her decline coincided with the passing of her mother, and shortly after her own death, the Queen Mother's. The passing of this formidable generation felt like the final curtain on the 20th century chapter of the House of Windsor. On February 9, 2002, following a final catastrophic stroke, Princess Margaret died at the age of 71. The fall was complete. The rebel who had lived with such incandescent passion was finally extinguished, leaving behind a complex legacy of glamour, duty, scandal, and sorrow.